The morning did not begin with chaos. It rarely did for her. Chaos was loud, sudden, disruptive, and her life had never been afforded such drama. Her days arrived quietly, one after another, blending together like pages never meant to be reread. The elderly black woman woke before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because her body no longer remembered how to rest past a certain hour. Years of discipline had trained her bones more deeply than any alarm clock ever could. She lay still for a moment, staring at the faint cracks on her ceiling, each one familiar, each one unmoving. Her breathing was slow and controlled. Pain waited patiently for her to move, as it always did. Knees stiff, back aching, fingers reluctant. These are not surprises. They were companions now. When she finally sat up, she did so carefully, as though negotiating with her own body. She placed her feet on the floor, waited for the dizziness to pass, then stood. Not hurried, not weak, just deliberate. That word had defined her for decades. The apartment was small, modest, and meticulously clean. Nothing was out of place. Nothing unnecessary remained. Over the years, she had learned the value of keeping only what could be carried emotionally. Photographs were tucked away in drawers, not displayed. Memories, she had discovered, were lighter when folded. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. The kettle, the cup, the chair by the window. Outside, the city was waking up without her permission, without her involvement. Cars passed. People hurried. Voices rose and fell. None of it asked anything of her, and she asked nothing of it in return. As she dressed, she chose her clothes with care. Not for beauty, for protection. Clean blouse, pressed skirt, comfortable shoes. Clothing, she knew, could not change how the world saw her entirely, but it could remove one excuse. She had learned that lesson young, long before age made it impossible to forget. When she looked in the mirror, she did not linger. She did not search for youth or regret its absence. She saw what remained. A woman who had survived quietly. A woman whose strength had never needed witnesses. The walk to the bank followed a route she could navigate without thought. Down the narrow stairwell, out through the heavy front door, onto pavement cracked by time and neglect. She counted her steps the way she always did. Counting gave rhythm to movement. It kept the mind from drifting backward. She passed buildings that had changed owners, but not attitudes. Shops that had closed and reopened under new names, but with the same invisible barriers. She had watched neighborhoods evolve without ever evolving with them. Progress, she had learned, was selective. As she walked, memories surfaced uninvited. Early mornings decades ago, rising before children who needed food she wasn't sure she could provide. Jobs where she worked harder than others and was thanked less. Moments where she swallowed words because speaking them would cost too much. She had learned when silence preserved survival. By the time the bank came into view, her pace slowed slightly. The building stood tall, polished, reflective. It had always looked that way, untouched by time, untouched by consequence. She stopped just outside the doors, adjusting the strap of her handbag, grounding herself before stepping inside. She had learned that certain places required preparation, even when the task was simple. Inside, the air was colder than necessary, the kind of cold meant to keep people moving. Machines hummed softly. Shoes clicked against tile. The line had already formed. She joined it without complaint, folding her hands neatly over her purse. Waiting had been one of her earliest skills. She waited to be called. She waited to be noticed. She waited for fairness that rarely arrived. Standing in that line felt no different from standing in countless others throughout her life. Behind her, a man entered the bank. He did not arrive with urgency. He did not scan the room nervously. He moved as though he belonged everywhere without needing acknowledgement. His suit was dark, unmarked by trends. His shoes polished but understated. His face calm, unreadable. He took in the room the way experienced men always did, not searching for attention, but mapping control. The woman did not notice him. There had been many men behind her in many lines across many years. Most had passed through her life unnoticed, just as she passed through theirs. The line moved slowly. A sigh here, a shuffle there. Someone checked the time repeatedly. She remained still, eyes forward, breathing steady. She had learned long ago that impatience belonged to those who believed time owed them something. When she reached the counter, She stepped forward and placed her documents down with precision. Every paper aligned, every movement intentional. She had done this many times before. She knew how quickly dignity could be misinterpreted as defiance. The teller looked at the papers. Then she looked at the woman. Something subtle shifted in the air. Not loud enough to draw attention. Not obvious enough to be challenged. But unmistakable to someone who had lived long enough to recognize it instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by distance, by evaluation, by quiet judgment. Time slowed. The teller examined the documents longer than necessary, tapping her pen lightly, glancing past the woman toward the line behind her. The gesture was small, but its meaning was not. The elderly woman felt it settle in her chest, heavy and familiar. That feeling had followed her entire life. The feeling of being measured against invisible standards she was never meant to meet. The feeling of being tolerated rather than respected. She straightened her shoulders. She did not apologize. She did not rush. She stood exactly as she was. Behind her, the man in the suit watched. He noticed everything. He noticed the teller's posture, the delay, the subtle contempt disguised as procedure. He noticed the way the woman's chin lifted just slightly, not in anger, but in self-preservation. He had seen this scene play out in different forms, in different places, under different names. Power, he knew, was rarely loud. It was exercised quietly, through permission and neglect. The teller leaned back slightly. The pause stretched. The manager lingered nearby, observing without engaging, calculating whether intervention was necessary or inconvenient. The woman waited, and in that waiting, decades pressed against her chest. Years of swallowing words. Years of choosing peace over confrontation because confrontation had never been safe. The teller finally moved again, faster now, colder. The transaction was rushed, stripped of courtesy. The message was clear without being spoken. Finish quickly. Leave quietly. The manager stepped closer, not to correct the behavior, but to ensure the moment ended cleanly. The system functioned best when discomfort was removed, not addressed. The woman felt the tightening in her chest, the signal she recognized too well, the warning that she was about to be dismissed, reduced, erased politely. Behind her, the man exhaled slowly. He did not intervene yet. He waited. The teller's movements became sharper now, less careful. Fingers slid papers across the counter without explanation. The pause between each action stretched just long enough to communicate irritation. It was the kind of disrespect that thrived in silence, the kind that depended on the victim choosing dignity over resistance. The elderly woman felt it pressing against her ribs. Her heart did not race. It sank. This was not new fear. This was recognition. She had felt it in classrooms where her intelligence was doubted before she spoke. In offices where her work was praised, but her presence was questioned. In hospitals where her pain had been minimized because it arrived in a body the world had learned to undervalue. She stood still because stillness had once kept her safe. She breathed evenly because emotion, she knew, could be weaponized against her. She told herself the same thing she had told herself for decades. Just finish what you came for, then leave. Behind her, impatience thickened the air. Someone shifted their weight loudly. Another checked their phone again. A sigh escaped, exaggerated, theatrical. No one spoke, but the message traveled clearly through the line. You're taking too long. You are in the way. The woman absorbed it all without turning around. She had learned long ago that looking back rarely brought relief. It only confirmed what she already knew, that discomfort, when directed at someone like her, was considered reasonable. The teller's eyes flicked toward the manager again. A silent exchange passed between them. A question, a permission. The manager gave a subtle nod, almost imperceptible. That was all it took. Authority does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is a glance. Sometimes it is the decision not to intervene. The teller leaned back, folding her arms loosely, letting the pause linger. The elderly woman waited, hands still clasped over her purse, knuckles whitening slightly despite her effort to remain calm. She felt the heat rise in her face, the familiar sting behind her eyes. Not tears. Never tears. She had learned to stop those long ago. This was something deeper, a quiet grief, the kind that came from realizing that no matter how long you lived, some battles never ended. The bank continued functioning around them. Machines counted money. A printer whirred. A security guard adjusted his stance, eyes drifting toward the door, not toward injustice. The world had learned how to continue uninterrupted. Behind her, the man in the dark suit observed without expression. He noticed the manager's choice. He noticed the teller's confidence growing as she felt protected by silence. He noticed the woman's restraint, the way her dignity held the line, even as pressure mounted against it. He had seen this pattern repeat itself across industries, across cities, across decades. Institutions protected themselves first. People like her were expected to endure quietly. Power did not reveal itself through cruelty, he knew. It revealed itself through indifference. The teller finally moved again, her tone colder now, her pace abrupt. The transaction was being ended, not completed. The implication hung heavily in the air. Whatever the woman had come for, it would not be handled here. Not today, not without complication. The woman felt the moment slipping. That tightening in her chest returned, stronger now. The signal she had learned to trust. This was the moment when she would be made to step aside, when the line would move forward as though she had never existed. She swallowed slowly. Her spine remained straight. She refused to fold inward. Even now, behind her, the man shifted his weight. Not forward. Not yet. He waited because timing mattered. Because intervention, when premature, lost its force. Because true power arrived only when injustice believed it had already won. The manager stepped closer now, presence heavy, voice prepared. The woman sensed it before he spoke, the way one senses a storm before the rain begins. Her shoulders tensed slightly. Her grip tightened around her purse. This was the moment she had learned to accept throughout her life. The moment when endurance replaced expectation. The moment when she told herself, once again, that survival mattered more than fairness. Then the man moved, not dramatically, not with urgency, just a step forward, measured and calm. The sound of his shoes against the floor was soft, but it cut through the room like a signal. The effect was immediate. Conversations faltered. The teller's hands paused mid-motion. The manager's attention snapped toward him instinctively, before reason could intervene. Something about the man's presence demanded acknowledgement without explanation. He placed an item on the counter. It was small, ordinary in appearance, something that would mean nothing to anyone unfamiliar with its weight. But to the manager, it might as well have been an alarm. The color drained from his face. His posture shifted instantly, authority dissolving into caution. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the object, then lifted slowly to the man's face. Recognition landed heavily, followed by something colder. Fear, not panic, not confusion. Fear sharpened by understanding. The teller noticed the change and felt it ripple through her. Her confidence evaporated. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she straightened in her chair, suddenly aware of every move she had made, every pause she had allowed. The elderly woman sensed the shift without seeing it. The air changed. The pressure lifted, replaced by something heavier, more controlled. She felt it settle around her like an unseen presence. The man did not speak loudly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His stillness carried more authority than shouting ever could. The manager nodded quickly, too quickly, stepping back with forced composure. His expression rearranged itself into something careful, respectful, rehearsed. The teller adjusted immediately, her tone softening, her movements becoming precise, almost reverent. The bank corrected itself in real time. The respect that should have existed from the beginning arrived all at once, overwhelming and artificial. Procedures were followed meticulously now. Apologies were implied through action. Every detail attended to with exaggerated care. The woman stood silently as the transaction unfolded properly at last. She did not react. She did not question the sudden shift. She simply allowed it to happen, confusion clouding her thoughts more than relief. Why now? Why suddenly? She gathered her documents slowly when it was finished. No one rushed her. No one sighed. The line waited patiently this time. Eyes avoided hers, not out of kindness, but out of awareness. She turned and walked toward the exit at her own pace. Each step felt lighter than when she had entered, though she could not explain why. She did not look back. She did not need to. Behind her, consequences were already taking shape. The elderly woman stepped outside into the sunlight and paused, not because she was tired, but because her body needed time to register what had just happened. The warmth on her skin felt unfamiliar, almost undeserved, as though the world had briefly adjusted itself in her favor and she was unsure how long the correction would last. She inhaled slowly, letting the noise of the city wash over her. Cars passed. Voices overlapped. Life resumed its rhythm, as if nothing remarkable had occurred. She descended the steps carefully, one hand brushing the railing, grounding herself. Her reflection passed briefly across the glass doors behind her, but she did not look. She had learned that reflections could lie. They either showed too much or too little, never what truly mattered. As she walked away from the bank, her thoughts drifted backward, pulled by the quiet weight of memory. She remembered other buildings like that one, other counters, other lines, different decades. The faces changed, the language softened, but the message remained consistent. You are tolerated here, not welcomed. She had learned to accept that reality, not because she believed it was right, but because resisting it had always carried consequences she could not afford. She walked the same route home, steps measured, posture steady. But something inside her had shifted, subtle yet undeniable. The humiliation she had expected to carry with her lingered only faintly, diluted by something unfamiliar. Validation, perhaps, or acknowledgement, not of her worth, but of the injustice itself. For once it had been seen. Inside the bank, the atmosphere had not returned to normal. It never would. The teller sat rigidly now, her movements precise, her confidence replaced by unease. She replayed the interaction in her mind. Each pause, each glance, each assumption suddenly magnified by consequence. She had not intended cruelty, she told herself. She had only followed instinct, habit, environment. But the realization offered no comfort. Intent mattered less than impact, and impact had arrived decisively. The manager retreated into his office, closing the door with more force than necessary. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, then stopped. There were calls that could not be undone, names that should not be spoken casually. He stared at the small object the man had placed on the counter, still resting there like a quiet threat. He knew what it represented. Not just authority, but reach. Influence that extended beyond policies and procedures, beyond buildings and balance sheets. He understood now how close the bank had come to something far worse than a complaint or a review. Institutions survived by avoiding attention, not attracting it. And attention, when summoned by the wrong people, never arrived alone. The man in the dark suit remained where he was for a moment longer, watching the ripple effects settle. He observed the forced professionalism, the sudden humility, the way fear reorganized behavior more effectively than any training ever could. He did not enjoy it. He did not need to. This was not about dominance. It was about correction. He had grown accustomed to witnessing injustice disguised as routine. Over the years, he had learned that systems rarely corrected themselves voluntarily. They required pressure, not chaos. Pressure applied precisely, quietly, at the right moment. He had mastered that art long ago. When he finally turned to leave, no one stopped him. No one asked questions. No one followed. The bank exhaled collectively only after the doors closed behind him. Outside, he blended into the city without effort. That had always been his advantage. Power, when loud, invited challenge. Power, when invisible, remained unquestioned. He walked at an unhurried pace, hands relaxed, eyes scanning without searching. He did not look for recognition. He knew it traveled faster than he ever could. As he moved through the streets, his thoughts drifted briefly to the woman. He did not know her name. He did not need to. He had seen enough to understand her story without hearing it. The way she carried herself, the restraint, the quiet endurance, those were not learned overnight. They were forged over decades of survival. He had known many women like her. Mothers, workers, caregivers. People who held the weight of the world without expecting gratitude. People whose dignity had been tested so often it had become instinctive. This time, the test had failed. By the time the elderly woman reached her apartment building, the afternoon sun had climbed higher. She paused at the entrance, resting briefly, hand against the cool brick. Her body reminded her of its limits. but her spirit felt unexpectedly light. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, as though marking progress rather than exhaustion. Inside her apartment, she set her purse down and removed her shoes, placing them neatly by the door. She moved to the window and looked out at the street below. Nothing had changed. People hurried. Cars honked. Life continued indifferent to her experience. And yet, she felt different within it. She thought of her children, now grown, scattered across lives she only partially understood. She wondered what they would have done in her place. Whether they would have spoken, whether they would have resisted, whether they would have expected better. The thought brought both pride and sadness. Progress always came with distance. She made herself tea and sat at the small table by the window. Steam rose gently from the cup. She wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. Her mind replayed the moment the room had shifted, the instant when power had intervened without announcement. She did not understand it fully. She did not try to. Some things, she had learned, were not meant to be dissected. What mattered was this. She had been seen, not as a problem, not as an inconvenience, but as a person worthy of respect. Inside the bank, emails were being drafted carefully, meetings scheduled discreetly, training sessions suddenly deemed necessary. The incident was discussed without being described. Names were omitted, responsibility diffused. The institution moved quickly to protect itself, to ensure that whatever line had been crossed would not be crossed again, at least not publicly. The teller went home, that evening quieter than usual. She avoided her reflection in mirrors. She replayed the day repeatedly, each version ending the same way, with realization arriving too late. The manager slept poorly, waking often, checking his phone, half expecting messages that never came. Silence, he knew, was not reassurance. It was observation. And somewhere beyond their awareness, the man continued his day as he always had, carrying the weight of influence lightly, responsibly, without indulgence. He did not consider what he had done extraordinary. He considered it necessary, because power, when left unchecked, always drifted toward cruelty, and justice, when it arrived quietly, often lasted longer. The days turned into weeks, but the memory of that morning did not fade. The elderly woman moved through the city differently now, not with arrogance, nor with fear, but with the subtle weight of someone who had been seen when it mattered. Every glance from strangers, every murmur of conversation, every minor slight she once endured now seemed smaller, almost irrelevant, compared to the quiet reckoning she had witnessed. The bank had changed too, imperceptibly, like water flowing through a channel it did not recognize. Procedures were tighter, manners more deliberate, and pride tempered by caution. The employees could not explain why, but the memory of that man lingered, like an echo too soft to hear, but too heavy to ignore. The teller, once brisk and dismissive, now approached every customer differently. She moved with careful attention, aware that power often appeared unannounced, and that consequences sometimes arrived like a shadow, silent but absolute. Each interaction reminded her that authority is fragile, and that arrogance can be corrected without a single word. The manager carried the morning with him as well, though he never admitted it. Decisions that once seemed trivial now bore weight. His gaze lingered on small actions, his mind calculating, always aware that control could shift without warning, that the balance of power was never truly his. For the elderly woman, life resumed its ordinary rhythm, though she understood now that ordinariness was deceptive. The world could be cruel, but could also correct itself in ways invisible to most eyes. That morning had shown her that justice did not always arrive through law or words, but sometimes through presence, through silent authority that did not need recognition to be absolute. And the man, the one who had intervened, he continued through the city as though nothing had happened. No one followed. No one knew. Yet everywhere he had been, a ripple remained. Fear, respect, and acknowledgement lingered in invisible threads. He did not seek gratitude. He did not wait for thanks. His purpose was not applause. It was correction, observation, and the quiet restoration of balance where it had been lost. Even as the weeks passed, the elderly woman felt a subtle shift inside her. She moved with renewed strength, aware that dignity can be preserved, that humiliation can be countered, and that sometimes, even in the smallest moments, the world offers a reminder that justice exists. Not always loudly, not always visibly, but undeniably. The city remained indifferent, its streets teeming with lives unaware of the silent power that watched over them. But some remembered, some adapted, some changed, subtly, cautiously, forever. And somewhere in the shadows, power continued to wait, as it always does, watching, measuring, ensuring that injustice, in any form, would not go unanswered. The lesson lingered. Those who wield power quietly are the ones who shape the world. And those who are unjust, even in ways seemingly inconsequential, are never truly beyond reckoning. In the quiet corners of life, the elderly woman found solace. In the subtle awareness of unseen guardianship, she found peace. And in the city that often ignored her, she found evidence that dignity, once acknowledged, even briefly, could alter the course of days, weeks, perhaps even lives. The bank, the city, the people, none would ever know fully what had happened that morning. But the morning itself would not be forgotten. It remained, etched invisibly into routines, behaviors, and the silent architecture of respect. And the man in the suit, forever unseen, forever powerful, continued through the city, ensuring that the world, for all its indifference, still held space for justice. Because injustice, no matter how quietly administered, never escapes observation. And neither does the force that ensures it is met.